How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Welcome back to Fine Tooning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. Or rather, that's what this podcast would be if Mr. Taylor were actually here this week. But Drew is out there somewhere right now. I'd imagine he's now on a plane that's coming back from London, where Mr. Taylor has spent the last couple of days covering the global premiere of Mission Impossible 8. And just a reminder here that in addition to this podcast, Drew hosts, along with Charles Hood, Light the Fuse, which is the official Mission Impossible podcast. And, well, because the 8th installment of that long-running film series, quick side note, next May 22nd, we're talking about the one that happens in 2026, will mark the 30th anniversary of the launch of the Mission Impossible film series, which, of course, came on the heels of the success of the Mission Impossible TV series. Huge hit for CBS back in the mid-1960s, ran for 7 seasons. And here's a quick side note on that side note. Given that the Mission Impossible film series wound up at Paramount in the 1990s, and more than 20 years later, CBS wound up merging with Viacom, Paramount's parent corporation, to eventually form what is now known as Paramount Global. It's just interesting to see how both pieces of this IP, the original TV series and the film franchise, wound up under the control of the same corporate entity. And now, on a side note, which I guess means you're now listening to the podcast equivalent of Christopher Nolan's Inception, I do want to point out that for a very brief window of time, we're talking October of 1988 through February of 1990, there was a revival of the Mission Impossible TV series that ran over on ABC. Mind you, this is before Disney bought ABC. That $19 billion acquisition wouldn't happen till, late July of 95. It wouldn't be completed till February the following year. So there's no real mouse-related tie here. And you know me, folks, I love me a good mouse-related tie when it comes to an entertainment news story. Anyway, this TV revival of Mission Impossible, relatively short-lived, only ran for 2 seasons, 35 episodes in total. What was interesting, though, is that Peter Graves, who, of course, had played Secret Agent Jim Phelps in the original Mission Impossible show over at CBS, came back to play the same character on the revival on ABC, only instead of working for the IMF, Jim Phelps was now in charge of the Mission Impossible team. Anyway, this protracted tale, which I know has absolutely nothing to do with animation, I'm sharing as a way to say Drew's away this week, doing stuff for the Wrap and Light the Fuse. But when he gets back and recovers from what's gotta be a world-class case of jet lag, I'm sure that Mr. Taylor will have all sorts of stories to share about his time in London. More importantly, about the trip he took prior to flying over to cover the global premiere of Mission Impossible 8. And that's when Drew flew up to Emeryville for the long lead press day for Pixar's next full-length animated feature, Elio, which arrives in theaters in just 5 weeks' time, on June 20th to be exact. Which is my rather long-winded way of saying you're getting a solo edition of Fine Tooning this week. It'll just be me jabbering this time around when it comes to this week's animation news and commentary. But please hang in there, people. Drew will be back with all sorts of cool stories that he's collected from his travels. Okay, I've stalled enough now. Let's get to this week's news. That said, we do need to take a moment to acknowledge this show's sponsor, which is, of course, the DVC Rental Store. And if you're planning your next trip to Walt Disney World, you can save some serious scratch by renting DVC points through the DVC Rental Store. Imagine staying at a deluxe resort for a fraction of the cost. That's a total game changer. And heads up, folks, the DVC Rental Store is currently running a limited time promotion where they're now offering the lowest prices of the year. So please check them out at dvcrentalstore.com. And if you already own or are thinking of joining the Disney Vacation Club, well, be sure and check out the DVC resale market. They're the leader in the secondary market with over 70,000 satisfied members. So whether you're looking to buy or sell your DVC points, they make the process seamless. Okay, per usual, we now pivot to taking a look at the past week's domestic box office, and you got to assume the people at Disney have to be happy with how Thunderbolts did over its second weekend in North American theaters, given that this MCU movie sold 33 million worth of tickets domestically, which is just a 55% drop-off in what Thunderbolts had earned over its opening weekend in North American theaters, which, I remind you, is 74.3 million in ticket sales. As of right now, Thunderbolts, or should I say the New Avengers, has earned $128 million domestically, an additional $143 million overseas, with a worldwide box office total to date of $272 million. Disney CEO Bob Iger seemed very, very pleased with how this new MCU movie is doing. He went out of his way as part of last week's quarterly earnings call for the Walt Disney Company to talk up this Jake Shearer film. And by the way, given that on the back of Thunderbolt's success, both this MCU movie's strong box office performance as well as the largely positive reviews this superhero movie has gotten to date, Shearer is now reportedly being courted to direct the next X-Men movie. So that kind of speaks volumes about how Thunderbolts is currently being viewed in-house at the Mouse House. That said, given that this is an animation news podcast, I guess I should mention that The King of Kings, that animated version of Charles Dickens' The Life of Our Lord, is still hanging in there. Now, mind you, it currently occupies the number 10 spot in this week's top 10 at the domestic box office, and has sold to date $59 million worth of tickets in North America over the past 5 weeks. Now, mind you, overseas numbers for The King of Kings aren't quite as impressive, just $5.8 million to date, which brings the movie version of The Life of Our Lord to worldwide box office total of just $64 million. That said, given that this Mofac Studios, which is based out of South Korea, reportedly only spent $25 million to make this hour and 45-minute long animated feature, I'm sure that when you factor in pay-per-view, Blu-ray, and DVD, and revenue from streaming, The King of Kings is going to make a healthy amount of coin. Just don't tell the moneylenders, okay? Okay. We were just talking about Disney's latest quarterly earnings call, which was largely about the company's new theme park and resort in Abu Dhabi, which, when it opens to the public some 5 years from now, will reportedly have, as its icon, a modern take on a Disney castle. Now, where this gets interesting is that the castle featured in this theme park's concept art is supposedly the one that we'll first get to see in Frozen 3, which, if it manages to stay on schedule, will be released to theaters in November of 2027. Now, just a reminder, at the end of Frozen 2, we saw Elsa step away from being the Queen of Arendelle, so Anna could now ascend the throne. And as for Elsa, after discovering that she was supposed to be the fifth spirit to inhabit the enchanted forest, behind the earth, fire, water, and air spirits, not only that, Elsa was now supposed to be the protector of the enchanted forest, the benevolent ruler of this magical place, the Snow Queen, if you will. That then means that Elsa can no longer live in her ice palace high up on North Mountain. That's a thing that Elsa conjured up when she was singing Let It Go in the first Frozen movie. So she's now going to need new digs in the Enchanted Forest. So that big white smeary thing in the middle of the concept painting for Disney Abu Dhabi, that's our first look at Elsa's new castle from Frozen 3. By the way, you can also catch a glimpse of this place on that piece of Frozen 3 concept art that Jennifer Lee shared during Disney Studios' presentation at the D23 Expo last August. This is the thing that was held in the Honda Center. And you see the new version of Elsa's Ice Palace in the upper left-hand corner of that image. Me personally, what I find interesting about this piece of Frozen 3 concept art, not the Abu Dhabi painting, is what Olaf, who's on the back of Anna's horse, seems to be looking at, pointing at, which is some off-screen character. Now, we don't see them. We just see their shadow reflected in the river. Whoever this is wearing a Viking helmet and holding a spear. So is he or she a friend or foe? I guess we're going to have to wait to find out till November of 2027. Now, as for that Frozen-themed castle, I just want to warn you folks not to read too much into this piece of Disney Abu Dhabi concept art. The design work on this park and resort is still very much underway, so things will come and go as Imagineers zero in on a final mix of elements here. But that said, given that this is the first Disney castle park that will be built out in the desert, where during the summer months temperatures regularly rise each day to over 100 degrees, that's supposedly why they decided to go with Elsa's Ice Palace, something that would be seen as genuinely magical, rising up out of the desert heat. We'll talk more about Frozen 3 and Disney Abu Dhabi in future episodes of Fine Tooning. But for now, let's take a short break and then press on with this week's news.
This episode is brought to you by Heyday. Feeling stressed? Take a moment for yourself with Heyday. Stroll through rows of golden wheat, tend to cute barnyard animals, and discover the joys of a digital farm retreat. You don't have to hop in a car or catch a plane. Escape to the farm at the tap of a finger. With Heyday, you're not just tending to a farm, you're tending to yourself. Heyday. Search Heyday, that's Hay space DAY, in your favorite app store. Heyday is a free-to-play mobile game and offers optional in-app purchases and random rewards.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
And we're back. And since we started off this week's Fine Tuning with a pretty lengthy vignette about the Mission Impossible movies, by the way, just a reminder, The Final Reckoning opens in theaters on May 23rd, and you can learn even more about this Christopher McQuarrie movie by listening to Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. You see, Drew, even when you're not here, I keep plugging your stuff. This is what we call loyalty, okay? Anyway, if we're being completely honest here, I'm kind of surprised that Mission Impossible movie series actually made it to 8 installments, given that the first film in this series which was released to theaters back in May of 1996. While it was wildly successful at the box office, original Mission Impossible movie, though it cost Paramount $80 million to make, would then go on to sell more than $450 million worth of tickets worldwide. Look, I'm being polite here. The plot of the original Mission Impossible movie was incomprehensible. Okay? I mean, first of all, screenplay for this thing reportedly had 5 different writers on it. Willard Huck and Gloria Katz, then David Cope, then Steven Zalian, then Robert Towne. Chinatown, Robert Towne. And even with all of these A-list writers hammering away at this thing, the original Mission Impossible movie still reportedly went into pre-production without a finished script. Now, mind you, director Brian De Palma did the best that he could given the circumstances. Brian tried to deliver a final cut of this film, which obviously had some dazzling action scenes, but he also wanted it to make sense from a narrative point of view. But look, I can't have been the only one who was confused by the storyline of the original Mission Impossible movie because, well, do you remember when Billy Crystal used to host the Oscars? And as part of his opening monologue at that year's Academy Awards, Crystal would then do this bit where, through the magic of special effects, he'd then have himself digitally inserted into key pieces of footage from that year's Best Picture nominees. And anyway, what we're talking about specifically here is the 69th Academy Awards. These are being held at the Shrine Auditorium on March 24th, 1997. And the last time prior to this that Crystal had served as the host of the Oscars was back in 1993 at the 65th Academy Awards. So the running gag of this year's Best Pictures compilation is Billy is nervous. He's not sure if he should actually return to host this year's Oscars. And remember, this show is going out live on March 24th, 1997, which, by the way, 10 months after the original Mission Impossible movie first arrived in theaters. So anyway, at one point in this film compilation, we see Billy digitally inserted into a scene with Tom Cruise from Jerry Maguire. If you remember the original film, this is the scene in the locker room where Jerry is trying to persuade Cuba Gooding Jr., who's air drying, to stay on as his client. And you may or may not remember this from the original Jerry Maguire movie, but Cuba Gooding's character has a list of demands, which Billy Crystal, as part of his opening bid for the Oscars, now parodies. He turns to Tom Cruise's Jerry Maguire character and says, "Okay, I will host this year's show, but I have some demands. First of all, I want Pauly Shore to win the Irving Thalberg Award. And then I want you to explain to me the plot of Mission Impossible." So, again, I want to remind you, 10 months after that Paramount picture had been released to theaters. And there are people out in Hollywood who, at that point, are still making fun of how incomprehensible the plot of the first Mission Impossible movie was. But if it's any consolation, by the time Mission Impossible 2 arrived in theaters, May of 2000, well, this sequel also had a lot of writers and A-listers. Oh, my God. William Goldman, Robert Towne again, plus Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga from Star Trek. And I'm not going to lie, it had a somewhat easier to follow plot. Which is why Mission Impossible 2, that went on to become the highest grossing film for that year worldwide, which is why a quarter of a century later, we're about to see the 8th installment of the series arrive in theaters in 10 days' time. That said, I still defy anyone out there to summarize the plot of the original Mission Impossible movie. It has some great action scenes, but a plot that makes no sense. But then again, to me, I'm sure Mr. Taylor understands the nuances there and could explain in full detail what went on in the movie. All right, anyway, back to animation now. So, we were just talking about last week's earnings call, which is when Disney CEO Bob Iger talked up a number of the studio's upcoming animated features, among them Elio, which arrives in theaters on June 20th, Zootopia, which shows up on November 26th, the day before Thanksgiving this year. Looking ahead to 2026, Mr. Iger also seemed enthusiastic about Toy Story 5, which is currently slated to arrive in theaters on June 19th of next year, as well as the live-action version of Moana, which is still on track to show up at your local multiplex on June 10th, 2026. Now, as for Disney's live-action version of Lilo and Stitch, Iger seemed especially excited about this new Dean Fleischer Camp film, which arrives in theaters on Friday, May 23rd, at the start of the 2025 long Memorial Day weekend. Again, as part of last week's earnings call, Disney CEO stated for the record that I've seen this movie a few times. I can endorse it wholeheartedly. I have a lot of confidence here. Tracking is enormous. Now, what Iger means by that is, well, when the official trailer for Disney's new live-action version of Lilo and Stitch dropped back on March 12th of this year, it quickly became the studio's second most watched live-action trailer with 158 million views in the first 24 hours. Likewise, when pre-sale for tickets to the live-action Lilo and Stitch went on sale just last week on May 6th, they quickly became the year's top seller for a PG title, even outdoing the Minecraft movie. So, taking all that into account, current box office projections suggest that Disney's live-action version of Lilo and Stitch will sell 120 million worth of tickets over the 4-day long Memorial Day weekend, which isn't to say that everyone is looking forward to this Walt Disney Pictures release. Fans of the original hand-drawn animated version of Lilo and Stitch, by the way, directed by Chris Sanders and Dean Dubois, have been particularly vocal about their displeasure when it comes to one certain aspect of the trailer for this upcoming film, largely because it shows Pleakley, the Galactic Federation's Earth expert, not wearing a dress. You may recall from the original Lilo and Stitch, which went into theaters back in June of 2002, that when Pleakley and Jumba were trying to get close to Experiment 626 and recapture him after he had escaped confinement and made his way to Earth, Hawaii to be specific, these two aliens dressed up as a human couple on vacation, with Jumba dressed as the male part of the couple and Pleakley dressed as the female. And Dean Fleischer Camp, who animation fans will recognize as the creator of Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which, I want to remind you, actually got nominated for Best Animated Feature, the Oscars, just a year or so back. He reportedly really wanted Pleakley to wear a similar outfit in the live-action version of Lilo and Stitch, only to be told by the current management of Disney Studios that this wasn't going to happen, that given the current political climate, doing something like that would likely create negative publicity for the film, surround Disney's live-action version of Lilo and Stitch with needless controversy. So, which is why this past weekend, Dean took to social media and actually shared an original piece of concept art that he had done for the live-action version of Lilo and Stitch, which clearly showed Pleakley in a dress and wearing a wig. And Fleischer Camp then went on to share via social media that he said, I tried. And speaking of trying, I promise on the next part of today's show not to include yet another lengthy story about Mission Impossible. But before we get to whatever that is, then there's this.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This message is brought to you by Abercrombie Kids, where the activewear is made for every summer activity, so your mini-me can bring their personal best. Summer days are always an adventure, from day camp to rec leagues and pool days. Abercrombie Kids has the shorts, tees, and swim to keep them comfy and keep up with them. Get everything for the entire summer at Abercrombie Kids. Shop in-store, online, or in the app.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
And we're back. Okay, couple of additional things before we wrap up the news portion of this week's Fine Tooning. On a previous edition of this podcast, we talked about how The Simpsons, Family Guy, American Dad, and Bob's Burgers had all recently been renewed for 4 seasons each by Fox. That's 16 seasons total of animation. Nobody's ever done that before. Well, we now have some additional news in regard to other animated series over on Fox, which is that they just greenlit more seasons of 3 of their other adult animated series. To be specific, Grimsburg, Krapopolis, and Universal Basic Guys. All right, so we're clear here. Grimsburg has been renewed for a 3rd season. This animated series debuted on Fox back in January of 2024 and out ahead of its broadcast premiere. We're talking all the way back October of 2022. Grimsburg got an early renewal for a 2nd season. In fact, Grimsburg's 3rd season renewal, it actually comes ahead of this adult animated series' return to Fox for its 2nd season, which gets underway on May 29th. Now, Krapopolis, which was created for Fox by Dan Harmon of Community fame, and you also probably know him as the co-creator of Rick and Morty. That debuted as part of their Animation Domination programming block back in September of 2023. This project was first set in motion all the way back in June of 2020, and then, in October of 2022, almost a year before Krapopolis first aired on Fox, it then received an early Season 2 renewal, which, by the way, has been something of a trend when it comes to Krapopolis. For example, March of 2023, some 6 months before this animated series for adults debuted on Fox, it got a Season 3 renewal. And then in July of 2024, 2 months before Season 2 of Krapopolis began airing on Fox, it got an early renewal now for Season 4. So last week's renewal, which will take Krapopolis through Season 5, is only its latest early renewal. And the irony here is Fox is yet to reveal when Season 3 of Krapopolis will air. The last episode of Season 2 of this animated series doesn't even air for 2 weeks yet. It bows on Thursday, May 29th. That said, though, and again, having friends who've worked in animation, this has got to be a lovely sense of job security. To know that the show you're working on will at least be in production for the next 3 years or so. Now, turning now to Universal Basic Guys. Okay, that was greenlit back in November 2022. This animated series for adults got an early renewal for Season 2 back in May of last year, 2024. And Season 1 didn't get underway on Fox till 4 months later, September 8th, 2024. again, what's kind of unusual here is, well, last week's third season renewal for Universal Basic Guys, it comes ahead of animation fans knowing anything about when season 2 of this animated series for adults is going to begin airing on Fox. And just in case you're wondering, there is no word yet on The Great North, Fox's other animated series for adults, as to whether it's going to be renewed for a 6th season. But this being the week where TV networks lock in all of their shows for the 2025-2026 season, that's the upfronts down in New York, we should know Great North's fate later this week. But look, animated series for adults definitely seems to be a growth industry these days. I mean, just in the past week, we learned that Ted, that franchise built on a foul-mouthed teddy bear, which launched with a feature film back in 2012. That was followed by a sequel in 2015 and a hit streaming series, which bowed last year, which, by the way, has since gone on to become Peacock's most watched original title to date. We just learned that Ted is going to be launching a fully animated series. Now, Seth MacFarlane will be returning to voice the title character for Ted, the animated series, as well as serving as the executive producer for this new program for Peacock. Rough Draft, the animation studio behind the Futurama revival, as well as Matt Groening's Disenchantment series, will be handling the production aspect of Ted, the animated series. And again, just to be clear here, Ted, the series, and that's a hugely popular show currently airing on Peacock, is a prequel to the original Ted feature films, whereas Ted, the animated series, will be a sequel to the 2015 installment of this series. And I don't know, I just find it kind of ironic that Peacock is leaning this heavily into the foul-mouthed teddy bear business, given that this past weekend when I was shopping in Target, I came across an end cap that was filled with those many moods of Stitch plushes, which, in addition to having LCD eyes, makes over 50 different sounds and reactions. Take, for example, if you bounce this Stitch plush up and down too much, Stitch gets grumpy. And I have to say, what an amazing coincidence, because if you bounce me up and down too much, I also tend to get grumpy. But again, as I mentioned on last week's Fine Tuning, I am a card-carrying, whiny baby man these days. All right. So now, as we close out this week's edition of Fine Tuning, I have an email to share that came in from one Penny Estes Berkey, who, as it turns out, is the niece of Disney legends Mark and Alice Davis. And Penny dropped me a line because she had found my contact info in her late Aunt Alice's address book. The Davises had been very kind and hosted me at their lovely home in Las Feliz a couple of times back in the 90s. So I guess this is how Penny came across my contact info in that book. Anyway, Penny dropped me a line to let me know that the Davis family has created this amazing line of exclusive Zekles? Is that how you say it? Prints, these amazing prints, pieces that Mark himself had painted and, by the way, were used to decorate the Davis living room. Anyway, I remember seeing these pieces on the wall as Mark and Alice would serve me the strongest cocktails I've ever had in my life, which is why I now have happy, if somewhat blurry, memories of these very same paintings. Anyway, if you yourself would like a replica of something that used to hang in Mark and Alice Davis's living room, well, I urge you to go over and check out this website, markdavisfineart.com. That's all one word, by the way, no spaces, except for the .com, I mean. And Mark, of course, is an M-A-R-C Mark, not an M-A-R-K Mark. There are some truly beautiful pieces on display here. More to the point, the Zeekleys point out the obvious, that there was a lot more to Mark Davis than just the stuff he did for Disney Animation Studios, or for that matter, for the rides, shows, and attractions that Davis designed for the Disney theme park. So you get a chance, head on over to markdavisfineart.com. There's great stuff to see and to buy there. And speaking of buy, I think it's time I said bye-bye. This solo edition of Fine Tooning is now up to, let me check, 34 minutes. Okay, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a little too much Jim Hill. But on the other hand, if you are anxious to hear Drew Taylor's voice before he and I record our next episode of this podcast, well, I just want to remind you that there is always Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast that Drew does with Charles Hood. And speaking of podcasts, I want to remind you that we have a couple others here at Jim Hill Media we'd love for you to check out. These include Disney Dish with Len Testa, the Epic Universal podcast. I do that with Eric Hersey. He's the talented gentleman who produces a lot of the shows here at Jim Hill Media. Likewise, there is I Want That Too. That's the Disney Merch podcast I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. And geez, I'm overdue to do a new episode of Looking at Lucasfilm. That's the Star Wars related podcast I do with Brian Gahn. Also want to remind you of Manufacturing the Magic. That's the themed entertainment history podcast we host here at Jim Hill Media. That's produced by Noah and Shalid Valladolid. Also want to throw a quick mention of Disney Unpacked. That's our Patreon project. We just posted a subscriber-exclusive episode where Len Testa, veteran Imagineer, Jim Schul, and special guest Chris Cox, mind reader extraordinaire. Those three and I discussed Disney Abu Dhabi. And for the month of May, we've got a brand new episode of Disney Unpacked in the works, one that will take a close look at the Muppets after the Disney company finally acquired those characters back in February of 2004. And all right, as we head out the door here, if you could please do Drew and I a favor, head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this show, is Fine Tooning as well as Light the Fuse. Social media wise, if you want to keep tabs on Drew, he is out there under Drew Tailored, like as in a tailored shirt. I want to see he's on X and Blue Sky under that name. Me, you can find me on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. Anyway, on behalf of Mr. Taylor, who I promise will be back for next week's show, thanks for listening to this week's edition of Fine Tuning, and we will be back soon.